In the university, I have more time for these sessions. In fact, in teaching the history of the Western Sudan, I teach a course on African history, and the first part of the course is from the origin of man to 1600, and the second is from 1600 to the present. Therefore, I have an entire year to teach the history of a survey course of the history of Africa. And each course is 30 sessions. So it takes 60 sessions to do what I am covering in 10 sessions. You understand that I'm condensing quite a lot. But I'm trying to get across the essence of what Africa was before the Europeans touched it. And this is what you have to know. And to understand, even if you understand the series, The Africans, you have to have read a lot of African history to understand the omissions. He throws in a lot of good things to disguise the fact that he's leaving out a lot of good things. And he is not telling African history chronologically. He's skipping here and there, and giving you little tidbits. And yet, he is downgrading it in some places and upgrading it in other places. He is one of the most unique Islamic con artists that has come along in years. But he never fails to throw in a good piece for Islam. He is running a unique game. I am not saying that there's not some good things in there. If you listen well, there's some good things. In the fourth session, he begins by downgrading the numbers of African slaves taken out of Africa, about 12 million. He must be absolutely crazy. Du Bois' statistics from 60 to 100 million in his examination of the records at the end of the 19th century. And they've been examined since then. And Cora, the Nigerian historian, said it must have been as much as 200 million. And in the movement of Africans from the hinterland to the coast, I saw figures and statistics this summer that proves that 7 out of 10 died in the movement from the hinterland to the coast. And at one lone fortress alone, Gorée, this is the French fortress, 20 million passed through that one. You got 36 slave forts, and 20 million passed through Gorée. And he said 12 million altogether. Then he asked the question about the Arab slave trade. He said there's only 2 million Africans in the Arabian Peninsula now. So what happened to these Africans? He wouldn't ask that question to a competent historian. A competent historian would know. The UNESCO investigation into slave trade in the Indian Ocean proves that 30 million Africans were taken out of East Africa for one given period. But if you haven't done your homework, you wouldn't know. And he said, now what happened to these Africans? Where are they now? if there's only 2 million in the Arabian Peninsula now, and he asks, where are they? Someone knows where they are and know where they went. Now he assumes that most people don't know, and he's right. Most people don't know. Because most people don't know about the millions of Africans who went into Asia. Africans who became slaves to the Maharajas of India and formed the armies of India, because the Iranians who conquered India did not trust local armies. And many of the Africans rose to high positions in India. One became governor of Bengal, Malacca. Another one rose so high as a general, they named a river after him, Ganges. Some scattered through the Pacific and can be seen, our relatives can be seen in the Pacific to this day. Some joined the black population and took over an entire continent called Australia. The British found the whole black continent when they got there and killed almost all of them. They found a neighboring island called Tasmania, and they killed every single person on Tasmania. There's a book on it called Last of the Tasmanians. Every single person on the island was killed. Man, woman, and child. When somebody talk about their Holocaust, remember, at least they're here to talk about it. All the Tasmanians are gone. Total Holocaust. We haven't done our homework. But at least the series is better than Tarzan. Notice how he praises the northern African countries like Algeria. Notice how uniquely he downgrades countries like Ghana and Nigeria. Notice how he downgrades in the so-called the Christian nations. Notice how he upgrades the Muslim countries. It's a con game. Very uniquely. But there was another series done by Basil Davidson that's far better than that one. But you're not going to see that one because that was done by an Englishman and a white man. See, sometimes we get into color games and don't know what we're doing to ourselves. Basil Davidson, every time Basil Davidson came to a critical part of history, he put an African historian before the camera to explain, and he did a good job of it. Basil Davidson's series was far more honest and more historically true than the one with Al-Mazrui. Al-Mazrui is descendant of Omani Arab slave traders, the most vicious of the African slave traders. If you don't know the history, you don't know this, you think you're seeing something that's good. And there are enough good pieces in the series to make a whole lot of people think that they're actually seeing something good. Now, I'm not saying don't see it by all means. There are quite a few good things in it. What's left out is another story. All right, let's get to work on what we have to do tonight, because we've got more before us than we've got time before us. What I'm talking about tonight is not only the missing pages of African history, but some of the missing pages of the history of the world. After the decline of the Roman Empire, forced by the rise of Islam and the pushing of the Europeans out of North Africa and the Mediterranean, more than 1,000 years of history got neglected from the history of the world. When African genius in state building began to decline in the Nile Valley, African genius in state building was reborn in the Niger River. And another great river civilization was born. This great river civilization have been left out of history. Entire history books, even history of Africa, has been written with this great river civilization left out. Left out because people are stupid enough to call this Black Africa. Never use the word Black Africa, not because Africans are not black. Black is an honorable word. There's nothing basically wrong with it. But because it presupposes that there is a legitimate white Africa. There is no legitimate white Africa. And so somebody says Black Africa, ask them, what other kind of Africa legitimately is there? You never say white Europe, and you never say wet rain. What other kind of rain is there other than wet rain? That's redundant. It's just like saying blue sky, blue sky. All right. My main point here is that when you look at the genius of Africa, that genius, once it declines in one place, is reborn in another place. And when you look at the continents of the world, and look at the people in the world, nearly all civilizations are born near great rivers. When you look at Africa, and you look at the civilizations of Africa, first the civilization of the Nile River, then the Niger River, then the Volta River, then the Congo River, then again on the east is the Limpopo and the Zambezi River. You go to China, China is the Yangtze River. Go to Europe, it is the Danube River and the Volta River. Go to England, it is the Thames River. Every time you go to a continent and look at and look for the beginning of a civilization and the beginning of a great city and a commerce, you find the river and the city on the river. Now we are examining a great civilization in Africa that had its birth after Egypt. To some extent, it is as old as Egypt, but it came to the attention of the world after Egypt. And to some extent, it benefited from the aftermath of Egypt. This is Nile Valley civilization that had its birth and flourished after Egypt. It is also a civilization whose people benefited from a river civilization that flourished in the green Sahara before it became a desert. You do not say Sahara Desert because the word Sahara means desert. Years ago, before the area dried up, cities existed in the area, and there were rivers in the area, water in the area, and it could support large population. There were cattle and life. All of this has been proven, especially in a book by a Frenchman, André Lotte, in Search for the Tisilla frescoes. Frescoes mean pictures. And he was searching for the cave drawings in the Sahara that indicated the kind of life that existed in the area before it dried up and became a desert. He also found something that Herodotus indicated in his writing, that a people lived in that area of Africa called the Garamantes. Herodotus indicated that the Garamantes went to war using a three-wheel chariot. Herodotus was wrong. Europeans think that everything that moves for war because Europeans are war conscious. What he thought was a war chariot was nothing but a utility wagon that Africans used to bring crops from the field. All of this in spite of the fact that there was a French historian, Raymond Mhenga, who went around the world, calling himself world's greatest authority on Africa, who will forever saying, until the 16th century, the African never knew the wheel. And at a meeting in Canada, when the African Young Turks stopped the meeting of the African Studies Association in the middle of his speech, told him, the meeting is illegitimate, you are illegitimate, get the hell out of here. He said, young man, do you know who I am? I am the great authority, Raymond Mhenga. Said, you are illegitimate, you are a fake, get the hell out of here. He's never been the same since, almost had a stroke. Someone later told him that, and I was the one that told him this, there were African chariot drivers in Rome, there were African gladiators, some Africans were in the arena being killed as Christians, and some Africans was driving chariots killing Christians, and I'm sure that their chariots had wheels. That was before the 16th century. I guess he's retired or dead, but it doesn't matter a great deal. But the African had known the wheel for quite a while, in spite of Raymond Mhenga's proclamation that until the 16th century, he didn't know the wheel. And he had a research institute in Senegal up until about 5 or 6 years ago, when they had the common sense to fire him. All right, now, my main point, I'm trying to show that before Ghana, a nation existed in the southern area that became the Sahara, before Ghana. And this is the preface for Ghana. And all this activity was taking place when the Romans were in retreat. And as the Romans were in retreat, this is 300 years before the Roman retreat, and that this activity in this part of Africa is unfolding as the preface to the beginning of the state of Ghana, and that Egypt, while in decline, is not exactly Egypt, because this is the country that the Greeks would later call Egypt, and that the ancient Egyptians never called their country Egypt. They call it Tamari, Kemet, Egyptus, and the word Egypt came from the word Egyptus, called by the Greeks. But now, as Egypt began to decline, and as the Roman period came to an end, and as Islam began to push, Islam and the Arabs began to push the Europeans out of North Africa, the rebirth of a new civilization began to occur in the valley of the Niger. But the activity that I've been alluding to occurred 300 years before the Roman decline, 300 years before the birth of Islam. But with the birth of Islam, Ghana as a state in the Western Sudan had already occurred and was a flourishing state at the time. Now, as they pushed themselves, meaning the Arabs and the Berbers and the Africans, as they pushed themselves into the Mediterranean and into Spain, the activity in Ghana is beginning to take place. Now, the history of Ghana is told in many ways. And the first history comes from a Spanish Arab, Il-Fasan, and his history is called Roads and Ruins. Now, the curiosity about Ghana has reached Europe. And when it reached Europe, an Italian king named Roger hires an Arab to write a book about this curious country, because it is called the gold country. Ghana stands astride the gold producing area in West Africa, and the roads from the Sahara into the gold country. And because they are the masters of the gold country, and anyone coming into the gold country must go through Ghana and pay a tariff, and they are rich, and they have kings who command the gold country, and they have a standing army of great consequence. They become known to Europe of that day, and everyone is curious because they cannot get into the gold country, and everybody wants their wealth, and no armies can penetrate this country. So now this king hires an Arab to go into the country to see if he can penetrate it. But this Arab has already gone into the country. He hadn't been able to take out anything. But this Italian king named Roger hires him to write a geography book explaining the country. And he writes this geography book, and he calls it the Book of Roger. As kings then who wanted information hired people to write books especially for them. Now you have the second book explaining ancient Ghana in the Western Sudan, in the states bordering on the Sahara, to the people of Europe. The third book is written by another Tunisian Arab, El Omari. All right, now, they learned later that Fulanis are living on the border of the country, and because of the poor translation of a word called loco, the assumption is that the country is ruled by whites. And many black scholars who are too lazy to do their homework, including John Hope Franklin, he says the country originally was ruled by white kings. Now the word loco, because they said the country was ruled by loco Ethiopians. The word loco meant alabaster then, at one time, but it meant foreign G, foreign Ethiopians. Now if you do your homework, you will discover that these foreign Ethiopians were Africans who came from outside of the area. Now you've got to do your homework and do your anthropology. You've got to study African customs to get at the heart of it. Foreign Ethiopians means Africans who came from outside of the area. If you understand your cultural anthropology, you will understand something else. In Africa of that day, and sometime in this day, royalty is interchangeable. If you're royal in one place, you can be royal in another place. If there's a weak royal system in one place, if a strong king shows up and wants the job, he can get the job. So some people invaded from the Volta River, people called the Musis, still in existence. And they invaded ancient Ghana in the 3rd century. They took over the kingship. In the period from the 3rd century to 770 is called the period of the Musi dynasty. There's a little book in paperback by Adu Boan, a Ghanaian writer, called Topics in West African History. He explains this. There's another book, African Glory. There's at least 10 books when all this is explained. The period of the Musi dynasty is noted for quite a few interesting things we have to look at. Arabs came down into ancient Ghana and lived in peace along with their religion that was at odds with African religions, which proves that Africans were very tolerant of religions not of their own choosing. After 70 AD, Jews had a difference of opinion with the Roman Empire, and the Jews and the Romans dispersed them, and they came down into ancient Ghana and lived among the people of Ghana, and they lived from the 3rd century until 770. And when it was discovered that they were collaborating with the Arabs to take over the state, they were expelled. This is important. It's important because this shows that a diversity of people with a religion alien to that of Africans can live among Africans for hundreds of years, so long as they respect the dignity of African people without being put upon, make a living, follow a separate religion, so long as they respect the dignity of Africans. But once they decided they want to take over the state of their host, the Africans said, in essence, get the hell out of here. Now, this is partly documented in a book called Hebrewisms of West Africa. It proves something else which Jews are not willing to face and blacks are not willing to face. That down through the history, we have been their friends, we have been naive about them, and they have never returned the friendship or sent us a thank you note. Now I can go back further to the entry of Abraham into Egypt, but that's enough. The main point here is that while the period of the Musi dynasty was a period of progress, it was a period of foreign rule. 770, the local dynasty grew strong enough to drive out the Musis. And the local dynasty came to power. And these were the people called the Sonokes or Saracoles. Now, the period from 770 AD to the period of the invasion of Ghana, 1076, is the golden age of that great state. It was invaded from what is now Mauritania, then the kingdom of the Susus, by an Islamized black named Abu Bakr. Let's look at Ghana under its own steam. Let's look at Ghana while it was being ruled by its indigenous kings called the Sonokes or Saracoles. What happened during this building period of that state ruled solely by its own people? In the 9th century, Ghana had a standing army of 240,000 troops, one of the largest armies in the whole world of that day. No outside help. There was no army in Europe that big at that time. 40,000 archers moving high. The king around 1000 was Kinesi. Now Kinesi is not known for very much, except he had a habit of inviting thousands of people for dinner. He would announce in the morning that he'd like to have about 10,000 people for midday meal. And by midday, 1,000 people showed up and the food was ready. Now this item wouldn't be worth much except if without warning a king announced that he wanted 10,000 people for midday meal and the meal is ready. That showed remarkable court organization. You had an army of people fixing food. Cattle had to be killed. Fires had to be lit. People whole rolls of meat had to be put on spigot and turned until it got on. Then they had to put it on platters and cut it and serve it. And I mean, the table, the kitchen was as organized as an army. You can't say that's primitive. That's civilized eating. Civilized organization too. In the meantime, the women were organizing themselves into an organization of great consequence. Then you have to look at the social order. But when you look at the social order of Africa itself, the things that white women are debating about now, Africans never debated about. You didn't debate about whether a woman was equal. Equal? Nobody was fool enough to debate whether a mother was equal to a giver of life. You going to debate whether she's equal? That's stupid. You don't even bring up a stupid conversation like that. You debate whether your mother, your grandmother is your equal? A Western man will debate something like that. Africans don't debate nothing like that. This is why the Africans had female gods earlier. You make a woman a god, you make a woman a god, didn't debate whether she's equal. You sell the question as to whether she's equal when you make her a god. And Africans had gods, but Europeans had shoes or houses with windows. See, what you have to understand, Africans created a system of spirituality, but the Europeans created a system of religion with no spirituality. They still do it. Do you think Jimmy Swaggart and Billy Graham got any spirituality? These are millionaire hustlers. Do you think they believe that? You know, on Rob, these people are millionaires. A true spiritual man wouldn't even be a millionaire. If he gave to the people he's supposed to, he wouldn't have $1 million left. If he served people where he's supposed to serve, he wouldn't have any money left. Now let's see, because in Africa the king was a priest king, and he was a distributor of goods and service. He was a keeper of wealth, not an owner of wealth. The main thing is, after Tennessee, that greatest king came to power, Ten Kamini, known as the king who rode out twice a day, every day. He would ride out among his people and administer justice. He would hold court wherever people thought an injustice had been done. And no one was obliged to move from his presence until that person was satisfied that justice in his case had been done. And the king was obliged to stay there until that person was satisfied. And the lowliest person could petition the king in his case. If he thought he had a case, the lowliest person could petition the king. This was democracy even to excess. This was the royal monarchy. You see, what you have to understand, Africans didn't preach about democracy. They just gave it. They never used the word. They just administered. See, in the second time, he would dress in royal regalia, dogs with gold collars, and men walking behind the horse. These were the men of the mat. Just in case the horse gets a little tired, these mats were silk and brocade. And the horse get a little tired, all the men had to do is to lay down the mat so the horse can rest. The king were better dressed than the horses were better dressed than the kings of Europe. Splendor. They said he had men with gold, with clumps of gold so large. They had a loop in the gold. When they want to steady the horse, they put down the gold and put the loop under the gold. The horse could stay there until he tended to business. There was so much gold that all the big hunks of gold were brought to the king. People could keep the little pieces. They had no commercial use for some of the gold. There was so much of it. See, that's why people came and envied our gold. This is what I keep repeating. That we have always been the world's richest people. Rich in culture, rich in material, and rich in spirit. This is why we didn't build no great churches and cathedrals. We didn't have to build churches and cathedrals. All life was our cathedral. We celebrated everything, and we respected life so much, we didn't even step on a cockroach. All living things are part of the celebration of life. A tree was part of our holiness. So we created spirituality. And the spirituality began to challenge when other people came along and created religion and began to commercialize on it. And what we have to get back, and what has saved us as a people, is our spirituality. See, when people created religions, they put it in a container. And they put some restrictive rules around it, but we were obeying these rules all along. We never said, I'm my brother's keeper. We just kept him. We didn't say that, my brother's died, I got to make sure that his wife was dead. We just did it. And it wasn't a Sunday go to meeting thing. It was an all-day thing. And see, it was the spirituality of that society that maintained it, but maintained it all of the time. And this is what the foreigners didn't understand. And this is what Islam did not understand then and does not understand now. And this is what the misconception of Christianity of that time did not understand then and does not understand now. And this is what we have to get back. This is what we must infuse in other things. All right, now my main point here is that during the period of Ten Communion, this is its high point of achievement as a great nation state controlling the trade routes to the north, controlling the gold trade from the north to the south. It was during this time that Islam, that had conquered the kingdom of the Susus, now Mauritania, began to envy this state that they could not convert to Islam. Failing to convert it to Islam, they decided to destroy it. Finally, the royal house of the Lemtunu decided to mount an invasion of Ghana. This invasion happened 1076. When Abu Bakr led this invasion, it was a success. He occupied Ghana for 10 years Then his co-religionists got in trouble. Already a bunch of religious fanatics called the Almoravids, created by another religious fanatic, Yusuf bin Tishfan, had joined the group in Spain, and that group, now in trouble, called for help. When Abu Bakr tried to pull the army out of Ghana to help the co-religionists in Spain, Abu Bakr died. Ghana regained her independence, but did not regain her strength. It would never be the same again. So therefore, Ghana, stripped of its ancient glory, continued to exist, but its strength is gone. Its great king Tenkaminin is dead, and the Susus began to prey on a neighboring state called Mali. When they invaded the neighboring state under a general called Samanguru, they killed all the members of the royal family except a crippled boy, Sundiata Kita, whose royal name was Mario Jetta. This crippled boy grew up brooding over the loss of his family and swearing that one day he will avenge the wrong done to his family. The Susus thought that he would not amount to anything and that they could make a puppet out of him. They were wrong. He grew up to be very strong and to challenge them, and one day he was called the Lion Prince. The important thing about Sundiata, the important thing about the African doctors of that day, that this boy, born crippled, was cured by African doctors, grew up strong and healthy, and drove the Susus from his country, consolidated his country, and took over all of the land area that once was Ghana. Now you see the consolidation of a large land area, that you see what used to be Ghana becoming part of Mali, and this land area is going to be consolidated later into Sangay. Now, the history of Mali can be told through three men: Sundiata Keita, the usurper Sakuru. Sundiata came to power around 1250 A.D. After he built the state, consolidated the state, and may well be its greatest emperor. After Sundiata, about 1250 to about 1265, now the state gets its first purely Muslim leader. Former servant in the court who seized power, called the usurper. His name, Sakuru. Sakuru goes on the trip to Mecca and Medina, and he decided to come through the southern route, down the Red Sea, through what is now Djibouti and Jigjiga, through what used to be Italian Somaliland, or French Somaliland. He meets the people who are no-nonsense people. They might be savage in the Hollywood sense, or might not. They're no-nonsense people. People call it the knock heels. They are the meanest people in Africa. They're the Turks of Africa. They're people who don't want any friends, don't want to be anybody's friend, and don't want anybody to be their friends. Tell everybody to drop dead, and they'll drop you dead if you mess with them. De Gaulle was went in that area telling them to stay in the French orbit. Told them to get the hell out. People started throwing rocks at De Gaulle. Get out of here. Anyway, when Socorro came into that area, they were the only people who would rob a caravan. They took his gold, anything valuable he had, and they killed him. And what else happened? They embalmed him and sent a runner all the way back to his home to let them know that he's dead. Then something else happened that I can explain chemically. They embalmed his body in honey. And when he arrived home, that's about 4,000 miles away, he looked lifelike. And all that African sun must have taken 2 months to get him back. How he could look lifelike with all that honey is sugar. I don't know how you explain this chemically. I guess some chemists will have to explain it to me. How he could look lifelike, I don't know. But every story I read said that he looked lifelike when he arrived. Then they gave him a big state funeral. But he was the second king in Mali. And he would open the way for the greatest of the most colorful, but not necessarily the greatest. I think Sundiata was still the greatest king. He would open the way for the most colorful of all the kings of Mali, Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa came to power 1306. Now, he would come to power and prepare for a great journey. He would dig special gold, make preparations for this great journey. He spent from 1306. He would not go on the journey until 1324. All that time he's preparing for this journey to Mecca and Medina. He's a great Muslim, devout. When the journey starts, it will be one of the most magnificent journeys in the history of the world. He will take from 60 to 100,000 people. He will take 50 royal hairdressers and he only favorite wives. If he got 50 hairdressers just for his favorite wives, so how many wives? You guess. He would have 500 men march in front of his entourage with staffs of pure gold. 250 camels, 250 pounds of gold each. Men would travel 2 weeks ahead of his entourage, letting people know that the king of the gold country is on its way. And there'll be presents for everyone. He would marry 50 people of his group into all the countries through which he would travel. Then he would say on his way back, we shouldn't be fighting each other because we are relatives. It was a great peace mission too. He would build, if he arrived on Friday, he would build swimming pools for his people to have pleasure on the journey when he stopped. This trip is well described by his own writers and others. One of the great journeys in the history. Mansa Musa's famous journey to Mecca and Medina. When he arrived in Egypt, the Egyptians thought he was so magnificent. One Egyptian chronicler said, "He is Africa, there is nothing else." For 300 years, they were singing the praise of the great king of the gold country. He crosses over to Mecca and Medina, had trees planted in his honor. He gave away lavishly alms to the poor, and he wanted to have a second well built at the well of Zamzam, where the prophet saw the mission. They told him that this wasn't exactly orthodox. So he thought with all the people going on the Hajj, pay respect to the Prophet Muhammad, that there wasn't enough water in the well. Well, now, with all the people going on the Hajj, they found some electrical way of sneaking some more water in the Hajj. After all, it's been a long time since the Prophet saw the mission and had drink water at the well, so maybe there's not enough water in there right now. In desert country. On his way back, he was proclaimed, or anyway, the intention was to proclaim him as Grand Caliph of the Western Sudan, really the chief administrator of Islam in the whole of the Western Sudan. But he was supposed to bow down and kiss the feet of the Grand Caliph of Egypt. He thought this ill became a head of state of his caliber. He declined the honor. They changed the rules just for him. He was still proclaimed the Grand Caliph of the Western Sudan. He was a little short of cash, having given away money so lavishly. So they made the whole treasure of Egypt available to him. Take what you want. The king of the gold country is good for it. So he took enough cash to see his way home and took 2 architects with him. These architects were to redesign some of the buildings in his country. Now this is no ordinary man, so no ordinary homecoming present is good for him. While he's away, his soldiers conquered the neighboring country and gave him an entire country as a homecoming present. They gave him the country of Sangay. Gave him the neighboring country, Sangay, as a homecoming. He goes to Timbuktu, and as security, he takes 2 royal princes, Alec Alone and Solomon Nap. You're not going to hear very much from Solomon now. They're twins, but Alec Alone is considered to be the oldest because he had the first bath after birth. That's an African custom. The old ladies gather around the twins, irrespective of who emerges from the womb the first. The old ladies look and look and look and say who they think is going to be the wisest. And they give that one the first bath. And that's the one that becomes, they lavish the greatest praise on. And that's the one that's considered the oldest. And generally, that's the way it generally works out. So these 2 royal princes goes to Mali. See now, look at the wisdom of it. Instead of declaring war and killing a whole lot of people, Africans just take 2 hostages and let the king know that if you start any stuff here, now I got 2 of your children in my house. And so if you don't want any harm to come to them, now you just behave yourself. Isn't that better than killing a whole lot of people? Well, that's the way Africans do it. There's a humanity even in war. So he takes these 2 royal hostages, takes them back, back to Mali. But he gives them a little too much freedom. And after the death of Mansa Musa, they have a tendency to ride out alone, and they ride closer and closer to the border of that country until they finally get the message across to that country, Sangay, that the other colonies are breaking away from Mali now that Mansa Musa is dead, and that it is time for Sangay to make a move. When finally they escape during the reign of the king that succeeds Mansa Musa, Mansa Mogan, Ali Colon comes across the border and he is proclaimed Soni, meaning liberator. And he becomes the first of the two kings to bear the name Soni Ali. And the country's great fame, Sangay, rises to fame under Soni Ali the first and Soni Ali the second. Now you're beginning to see the formation of the largest and the greatest of the great African kingdoms before the slave trade. This is the kingdom that is going to go to great height. And Soni Ali II and his successor, Askia the Great, Muhammad bin Abdullah Hassan, is going to be Muhammad Ahmad, is going to be two of the greatest Muhammad Ituri is going to be two of the greatest Africans born in the last 2,000 years. And they will take this nation to Africa's great walk in the sun. And this would be the greatest performance of Africans in ruling the state since the decline of Egypt. What we will examine in the next session is the last of these great states, Sangay, the last great state before the slave trade. And I will show that this state equal and was far superior to the European states of its day, and was far superior to some of the European states of this day. And it is a pity that you don't know about it. It's a greater pity that our children do not know about it. We have to go back into our history and learn this. And the main thing that has been directed against us that makes us feel so depressed is that we have been robbed of the concept of self-confidence and historical memory. And once we understand what we have done, we will understand what we still have to do. And that self-confidence and historical memory is what we need to reclaim again, not just for ourselves, but for our children. Because once we understand where we have been, we understand where we are. But most important, we will understand what we still must be and where we still must go. Thank you.
I was told, and I find it very devastating, because matter of fact, I've never heard of Gori Island before. And this is why for the past 2 weeks I've been talking to you. I am taking 35 children. We've been raising money for 2.5 years for that reason, so that they can be exposed to that. Because I am 40 years old and never heard of Gori Island.
Well, Gori Island is the French clearinghouse for slavery. And it's off the coast of Senegal.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a tourist attraction. And it's I was there twice this summer.
But I find that a devastating experience. It was a devastating experience for me.
Well, if you think that's a devastating experience, you wait till you go to Mhenga in Ghana, which is the largest and the most gruesome of the slave force. One lady collapsed at Goree. I said, if you collapse at Goree, when you get to Ghana, I don't know what you're going to do. I advise you not to even go to Ghana. Because the worst one's in Ghana.
Dr. Clarke, as we look through history, we see that Africans seem to be the most prevalent, peoples of slavery. The Arabs, the Indians took African slaves. What was it that made Africans accessible to slavery, or in their nature? I mean, was it anything in their nature, or was it something in the way the villages were organized that they couldn't protect themselves from being captured and taken in such large numbers to various parts of the world? China even took African slaves. Why didn't they take Chinese? Why weren't other peoples taken? Or were they?
Well, there's a naivete in our nature as a people that's still there. We're still basically an unprotected people. We still act as though we don't need protection. We still have not recognized the meanness in other people to the extent that it exists. And until we do, we will continue to be in existence. There isn't, I doubt if there's 50 good fighter pilots in all Africa. A whole continent. Well, that's not a good answer. In ancient Africa, they acted as though they didn't need protection. In the first African invasion, a bunch of sheep herders from Western Asia came in and took over Egypt. They were called the Shepherd Kings. We've always been misguided about other people's intentions. We still are. We misguided about what other people say they mean. We still are. It's bigger than that. And that's a good question. There's a lot of people in the world. Why us? There were more people in Asia. Why not them? When Christopher Columbus set out, he had instructions to go to Asia, the land of the Kublai Khans. Why did he come to the West Indies? Why did he double-cross Isabella? And he did. And he recommended, was one of Christopher Columbus' recommendations, that the slave trade was increased. When he destroyed the Indians, he said, go get the Africans and replace them. Why not go get the Chinese or somebody else? Why the Africans? This won't change until we change it. We have a naive concept toward ourselves, a naive concept toward the world. We have to change it. We have to stop buying other people's discarded junk and other people's discarded isms. Breaks my heart to say it, but we're partly to blame. I was lecturing earlier today to federal workers, and I said that one thing that we begin to think about seriously is the essential selfishness of survival. Think of ourselves first and foremost, and everything else have to come after that. We haven't made up our mind if that's what we have to do. Everybody else will do it. That's not a good answer either, but I don't have one that I believe you'll listen to.
Dr. Clarke, can you give us that word that has the meaning of alabaster that John Hope confused?
It's loco. It means transparent.
Transparent.
And it was interpreted as it really means something white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in ancient times, mm-hmm. It was interpreted when they called the people local Ethiopians. Mm-hmm. He interpreted it means white Ethiopians, and a lot of people think the Ethiopians belong to the white race. And he said that ancient Ghana was ruled by white kings, and it was a misinterpretation of what they meant, when actually ancient Ghana was ruled for 300 years by the Musi people from the Volta River.
So the Musis were actually these foreign Ethiopians that...
Yeah, I mean, the word Ethiopia used to mean all Africa.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That means foreign Africans who came from another part of Africa.
Okay. I just have one question from last week. You mentioned that Islam instituted the system of patriarchy or patrilineal inheritance, and that caused a lot of confusion. My question is, before these invasions of the Asians and Islamic rule, was Africa all matrilineal?
The Zulus are exceptional. The Zulus are patrilineal.
Okay, this was before any invasions. They were patrilineal.
The Zulus are patrilineal.
But was the majority of Africa...
The majority of Africans are matrilineal to this day.
Even in West Africa? Before these invasions?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Clarke.
Good evening.
Through your lectures, I hear you say a specific word in describing African peoples. You talk about the monetary riches, talk about the socialisms and the democracy of it, but you keep passing on or speaking about the spirituality of the African, but you don't go into elaborate. Would it be possible for you to speak to us about the spirituality of the African?
Yes, I mean, the spirituality is really what holds the African together. I mean, not the elaborate church, but the spirituality is in the family structure, is in the indigenous religions, is in what they do as against what they say, is in the attitudes. I'm not talking about the Western educated African, the African who comes to the West and play games. I'm talking about the sense of welcome that you get in the villages, and the African who's not a Christian, whose attitude toward you is more Christian than that of a Christian.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Clarke.
Good evening.
I would just like for you to expand on a statement you touched on before about the African being so open and receptive of others as long as they didn't, interfere with their religion, such as the Arab and the Hebrew who came into Ghana earlier, and they were immediately trying to conspire. Do you think that's happening today in view of the fact that, especially in black areas here in our city, that we have so many Arab merchants now coming into our areas and whatnot? And then the situation in the Middle East, could that all be like tied again? We will see, as you said last week, about the perhaps the Israeli and the Arab laying down in bed together again to conspire against Africa.
I believe it's the same scenario all over again. Unfortunately, I think it's all over again, and I'm suspicious in that regard. I really think that we are people with no friends of consequence in this world, and I don't think we know it. I think marginally we have a few individual friends, and I think we have overestimated even that, but I don't really think we have many friends among the other so-called ethnic groups, but I don't think that we are a minority. I really think, I don't think the Arabs who in our community have any true friendship among us, and I think people will save themselves, and if they have to save themselves at our expense, they will have no compunctions about doing it.
Thank you.
Dr. Clarke, just words to say thank you for your very illuminating lecture. As always, it brings one to mind of the great scholars of old, like Confucius and his disciples. And one can think of the Christ and his disciples and so forth and so on, just on true knowledge, what I think the Hebrew calls it well, anyhow, it's truth in Hebrew symbols. I'd like to, I was hearing you speak, I reminisce of when I was a child and first went to kindergarten and so forth and so on. On the blackboards, as I remember, when we had to learn to write the alphabet and do the Arabian number system, they had this exercise where you first swung your pencil like this, and you swung your pencil like this, and so forth and so on. And I recollect I think it was back in the 60s or late 50s, they had a program, I think, by the BBC on television, which of course is anathema to any thinking person. But anyhow, they had this program by the BBC on television. And here was a British classroom. And whereas all that was up on our boards was the blackboard, and then this kind of exercise that you swung and did like this, in Britain they had the same thing. But they had under it, mathematics is life. In other words, number is life. You see what I'm saying? And one reflects that America seems to be the great land of half-truths. They tell you that silence is golden. But in fact, that's from Alice in Wonderland. But in fact, the true aphorism is speech is silver, but silence is golden. That's why to really learn in this country, you have to teach a kid to look twice, at everything this man says or writes. You see, and they talk about women having second sight and so forth and so on, is why they were venerated as goddesses and so forth and so on, and why the Delphic oracle was a woman. And true goddesses, going all the way back as far as you can stretch in history. Now, my point is this. There's a brilliant Japanese scholar who will be coming to Harlem this weekend, Dr. Mhenga, a master of physics from Graduate Center at CUNY. And he lost most of his family at Hiroshima. I think it was about 40 members. And as a kid from 13, he read everything he could get his hands on in physics. And I think by the time he was 17, he built his own reactor. Now, he gives lectures on a FM station called WBAI every Wednesday at 7:15. And he's talking about when the Earth was created some 4 billion years ago, they're now thinking it was created in 10 dimensions. And the first dimension is time and distance. That's where we are, first and second dimension. And then there's space and outer space, the third and fourth dimension, where the white man rules. You see what I'm saying? Which is why talk of revolution is, innocuous and foolish. But the point is this: if the Earth, by a Big Bang theory or whatever, was created 4 billion years ago, And if Leakey and his parents in Africa have now discovered the forerunner to man dating back to 14 million years ago, and if, as we speak now, this is the Hebrew year of 5747, and the Chinese year about 5800, and the Islamic year, whatever, or, same order of about 5,000 years. Well, what happened to the other 13,995,000 odd years of history? And if we bear in mind that Napoleon said history lies mutually agreed upon, that's where's the other 13,995, etc. I mean, would you like to dwell on that? I mean, to illuminate us?
Well, inasmuch as we gave the world the calendar and the concept of time, why are we always dwelling on somebody else's time and somebody else's calendar? We gave the world the 365-year. And we've dwelled too much on other people's folklore and not enough on our facts. There's nothing to dwell on. We keep harping on other people's figures and not ours, not what we came up with. There's a little book called by Breasted, Henry Louis Breasted, Dealing with Time. And there's a whole chapter on Nile Valley concepts of time, African concepts of time, which predates everything everybody else has said and everything everybody else has done. Why can't we think about our concept of time? Why are we forever talking about other people's concept of time and space and everything? Our concept of time and the measurement of time predates the whole Adam and Eve concept, which is folklore. And we can't separate folklore from fact. The Bible is beautiful folklore with a lot of fact is in the Bible. Beautiful. And can be documented as fact. There's a lot of folklore too. We can, with wisdom, use both.
Dr. Clarke, you said earlier that we had no friends of consequence. In your estimate, why don't we have any friends of consequence when we have helped the whole world at one point or another?
We fed the whole world because we have been rather naive in the use of our own power, and we permitted too many people to use us and to use our potential without protest. And we are the rightful owners of the world's richest continent. And we permitted the rape of that continent without suitable protest. And people don't respect your power until you protect your power. And we haven't asked the right questions or gotten the right answers. With African people scattered across the world and with almost 1 billion African people on the earth, we shouldn't have to beg for anything. That's right. We've let ourselves be reduced to beggars. We shouldn't ask for the freedom of South Africa. We've got enough manpower to kick them the hell out of that and ask no questions. And if there are whites who want to stay in Africa so badly, and who love Africa so much they won't leave, then we should just give them a piece of Africa, the length of their body from head to feet, 6 feet under the ground. All right, so here, you stay here. Nobody's going to bother you. Don't argue the point anymore. Mary Clyde Bethune said something before she died, that we must stop being a people begging and pleading, become a people insisting and demanding. I said earlier today, we must begin to practice the essential selfishness of survival. We must protect ourselves and look after ourselves. Everybody does this, and why can't we? And they don't apologize for it, and why should we?
Dr. Clarke, in further separating folklore from facts, can you give us some information around the origins of the Hebrew people and the Jews and the Jews in our history?
Well, they came out of Western Asia, and their first entry into history is when Abraham led them into Africa, escaping famine in Western Asia. And the Africans fed them and befriended them. And when the Africans were invaded, they failed to respond to the needs of their African benefactors. Then they created some folklore about what they did for the Africans, which had no proof in fact. There's no proof that they were ever slaves in Egypt. And if anybody got any proof, I'll hear it. I've been asking for it most of my academic life. Not one iota of proof has been furnished. They were not slaves in Egypt. And they built no bricks with or without straw. They built no pyramids. All of the pyramids were built before they got there. The pyramid period was over 1,000 years before Abraham got there. They arrived during the 13th dynastic period. All of the pyramids were built between the 3rd and the 6th dynastic period. The pyramid period was over 1,000 years before they arrived. Now that happens to be a fact. And yet Mhenga and Begin shouted to the world when after Camp David he turned to Carter and said that you worked harder on this treaty than my people worked building the pyramids. What pyramid? No pyramids were built. That's folk history. I mean, we have people are entitled to folklore. I've told you a piece of folklore. Let me tell it to you again so you can understand the difference between folklore. I grew up in the High John the Conqueror country, in the John Henrik, country in the South. Most of the High John the Conqueror country. Anytime we wanted to say something, say, man, you know High John the Conqueror, he went upside that white man's head, and that white man ran like a jackrabbit, kicked him until his behind looked like jelly. We know it's a lie. And we enjoy the lie. Anytime we couldn't kick a white man, we bring out High John the Conqueror and let him do it. But at least we know it's a lie. When we don't have the bravery to do something, We create a fictitious character called John the Conqueror and let him do it. I think a whole lot of people create a whole lot of fictitious characters that make you believe it. But I wish somebody would read, there's a 3-volume work called The Folklore of the Old Testament by Sir James Frazier. I'm as spiritual as anybody that walked this earth. But I believe more in spirituality than I believe in religions, because I think Western man has made a mess out of religions.
Dr. Clarke, I agree with what you was just saying. That's why I came up here. And like I find when I talk to the Christians and to the Muslims and you get into the history of like the Nile-Valley civilizations, they basically don't want to hear anything besides the Bible or the Quran. I mean, I would like to know why is that we don't go back to what we had. Like, you know, you can hear these Christians, they can clap all day, the Muslims can clap all day, but when you leave, it seems like they cipher it out and they go right back to the Bible and they find the cliche. I call them like the great one-liners. They can find a great one-liner, but they really don't do, like you say, in the preaching or go back to the real thing. I'd like to know why is that we can't.
Because they can't deal with truth. And I call them carbon copy religions, and I go back to the original copy. And I feel more religious by going back to the original copy other than the carbon copy. And so I feel that I'm more religious than they are. And I believe service to God's people is preferable to prayer. I serve people. I do solve people in substitute to prayer. And I believe if I serve God's people, whoever his people are, and I think everything that walks the earth is a child of God. And if I serve them and walk as righteous as I understand righteousness to be, wherever heaven is, I'll get there somehow.
Dr. Clarke, thank you very much. I've heard you speak from time to time, and I appreciate and consider it an honor being able to hear it. But about this Jewish and Arab thing, I'd like to have a few things cleared up in my mind. Now about this Jewish thing, I've been in Casablanca, Libya, and a few other places. I ran into what was referred to me by the Arabs as black Jews. And one time I got in trouble because they were unloading some cargo. And the man, little short black man, looked up at me and he said, "Hey brother," he said, "give me a cigarette. We're brothers." That time cigarettes were worth money. I gave the man a pack of cigarettes. The other fellows there worked. They looked at me and said, "Don't give him anything, say he's a Jew." This was in Libya. Grabbed the man, turned him upside down, took the cigarettes off of him, took as many of them off of him as they wanted to, threw the rest of the pack down on the barge, and put them in his pocket, the ones he wanted. The man told me, "Thank you." And I happened to be on the rail when they went down to lunch, and that man cussed me out. You know, because cigarette, I guess, might be worth $3 or $4. I don't know how much they make in a day. In another part of Libya there, I took a walk one afternoon, and I see these little black women, black clothes on, all muffled up, and we was walking through the street, me and a couple other fellas, almost, but I was scared to go up in them caves, because I knew how some of them people felt. I didn't bother. The next time I ran into some black Jews, I was in Casablanca. Of course, this boy was in Western Club, was well dressed, and he was driving the French out. It was a little more independent there. Now, how did these people become so involved with this Jewish thing? And yet it's still, you know, you've never heard, if I had never been there, or I hadn't seen it with myself, I wouldn't even known that they existed until I ran upon Dr. Yoakum and fellows like this. And in East Africa, I know I was standing there in Dar es Salaam one time. We was looking over on that island there, right? And I forget what the name of that island is. They told us.
Zanzibar.
Yeah, they were just coming into their first independence period at that time. And the African brother there told us, he said, look, he said, they having plenty of trouble. He said, they'll be coming to America pretty soon. He said, but don't be nice to them. He said, when they come to America, he said, drive them into the sea. That's what the man told us. That's, a little while ago, been over 20-some years. I would like to know, how are we to respond to all this controversy between the Jews, the Arabs, Polacks, anything else that's coming over here that we run into?
There are Jews and there are Jews. Blacks who belong to the Hebrew faith still are responded to as blacks people, even by white Jews. And they lie to their face about it. The literally kidnapping of the so-called Falashis was a dodge to try to offset the racism of Israel, because to let the world, to give the world the illusion that Israel is not a racist state that it is. They don't really want them there. They're turning their women into servants and their men into studs. Eventually, they're going to be shipped back to Ethiopia once they make the point they want to make. Now, the Sephardics, who look more Israeli than the Africans, have not had a good time of it, and they're 60% of the population. Only they're brown and some black. But if you're black, no matter what religion you belong to, you're going to have a difficult time among whites wherever you are, no matter what religion you choose. And once you understand this, you're going to find out, or beginning to find out what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to unite with other blacks, no matter what their religion are, no matter what their religions happen to be. You're going to have to unite and mount an offensive against people who bring misery on you just because you're black and not because of your religion. There's an assault on people just because of their skin color and not because of their religion. I think Malcolm X said once, you are discriminated not because you're Baptist, not because you're Protestant, not because you're Muslim. You are discriminated against because you're black. And you should unite because you're black. Now that's a problem all of us got in common, no matter what the skin color happens to be, a shade thereof. And that on that one point, let's all of us stop kidding ourselves. Being a Muslim not going to save you from it. Being a Protestant not going to save you from it. Being a Baptist or another variety is not going to save you from it. And a lot of people join a religion, think by joining another religion, you're no longer a part of the troubles of black people. No religion is going to save you from what you have to face as a black person. No politics is going to save you from it either. And we might as well face this. Israel is a white imperial nation. And the European Jew is a white European imperialist whose nation was created for European white imperialist interests. And no matter what you can be as Jew as you want to religiously, if you're black, you still got black troubles.
We want to thank Dr. Clarke. Give another round of applause.